There are rules to being alive. Many are obvious, but the dangerous ones are not. And chief among them is to never, ever deal with the old spirits. War, terror, and peace, to name a few. Each name was assigned to them by the species they haunted. All of them are parasites or mortals. Each species throughout the universe had them in some form or another, but in time, a sufficiently advanced species learned never to take their deals. These deals weren't contracts, but implicit agreements made through embracing their very nature. Practicing their nature draws them close and threatens to bind. An indulgent aristocrat is consumed by gluttony, a slave to mortal pleasures. A caretaker gone too far will be a helot of joy, unable to cry, laughing at corpses. A tactician will be bound to logic, a vassal of cold, emotionless decisions. A soldier drowning in conflict became a savage fowl to war, thirsting for only strife. Each condition was nearly irreversible and unnoticeable to the affected. The only known cures were a lifetime away from the spirit's domain, or surviving an exorcism. Tuella was one such exorcist. She was a Saffronite, hailing from one of the core worlds of the Greater Whole, the Galactic Government. They were a rather slim species with pale blue skin, the texture of soft leather. Their one head has 4 eyes, 2 triangular ears with supreme muscle control, and a small but flat nose. A live tail supported balance. 4 slender digitigrade limbs, 2 legs and 2 arms made for extreme mobility. Metallic hair atop their heads was seen as a symbol of their health. Long, shiny hair meant greater health or social status in olden times. Tuella's was proudly down to her waist. But, more important than her species, was the fact that she was a clairvoyant, one who could see the works of these old spirits and possibly exorcise them. Their 4 eyes and a higher percentage of clairvoyance in Saphronites created the myth that they were biologically attributed to spirits. But that was off topic. What mattered was that clairvoyants like her were oft dispatched by the Greater Whole. Their mission, to observe groups or individuals possibly connected to old spirits, was the highest of honors. They single-handedly prevented wars, trafficking, and all other crimes of the spirit. They were to find the affected people, then contain, exorcise, or, if they are beyond all hope, terminate the affected. This is why Tuella was so honored when she was told to observe a newly discovered species. They'd just been reported at the very edge of the Greater Whole's territory. As was procedure since the Scifi extinction, a clairvoyant was dispatched to check if the species had fallen to the sway of spirits. One individual was bad, a group worse, but a whole species? They'd only encountered such a species once, the Scifi. The Greater Whole had been forced to wipe most of the population out, and those who remained fell to war and sorrow. Tuella hoped the humans, translation in the process, had not fallen to their spirits. She guided her ship into HFY, where intelligence reported a small ship of these new species arriving. How ironic that they'd arrived on the planet where the Scifi had made their final stand before. Their homeworld had long since been lost by the time conflict came to this planet, but maybe this mass grave could bring peace through something other than war. Tuella landed her ship far away from these aliens in a deep ravine. She activated her ship's camouflage and her cloak and began her hike to the alien ship. The planet's gravity was slightly heavier than standard, but Tuella had trained for worse. The ruins of the once great capital of the planet lay between her and the aliens. If they were a curious people, they'd want to explore the ruins. The city suffered from bombardment during the extinction, but it had already suffered the old spirit's corruption. War, sorrow, and fear had long since kept pirates and explorers away from HFY. But Tuella was a clairvoyant. She walked into the city without fear. Tuella checked her wristcom. The device was detecting several life forms in the city, all alive and moving. She climbed up a ruined tower, overlooking the street below her. The life forms had entered the city, and Tuella eagerly awaited to see the aliens. Eventually, she saw one round the corner of a street. The alien was dressed in a rugged fabric consisting of pants and a shirt. It was crude next to Twella's clairvoyant uniform, a skin-tight synthetic weave that was both popular for her kind and functional for her line of duty. But what her mortal sight could see was a rather standard alien. 2 plantigrade legs, unlike a saffronized digitigrade, and 2 hands with opposable thumbs. The face was uncovered, showing a mammal appearance. Short hair atop the head, with a very dirt-like brown tone. 2 eyes and a larger nose, a mouth with lips. All around, nothing unusual about these humans. On the alien's hip was a holster for a weapon. What type, Twella couldn't tell, but that wasn't important to her mission. Clairvoyants can see the shackles of old spirits, and Twella's spirit-attuned sight saw nothing on this alien. None of war's claws, joy's bubbling aura, or regret's trailing fog. Twella breathed a sigh of relief. They weren't under enchantment. She checked her wristcom again, noting that there were more lifeforms nearby. A bestial cry echoed through the city. Twella's ears pivoted to her right before her head. Prowling the city streets were Zariki war beasts. Ah, so those were the other lifeforms she detected. Medium quadrupedal beasts bred for war by the Zariki. Beasts couldn't be affected by the old spirits, but their actions could coincide with their natures. The Zariki used them to great effect in combat. However, when the Zariki forces were quarantined, the war beasts turned on their masters. War was the dragon that devoured itself. War couldn't defeat war. More enemies could always be found. Only peace could defeat war, but those who fell to peace were only freed of the will to fight, an infectious passivity. The alien reached into his holster and retrieved a gun. Rubble blocked the alien and war beast from sight, but Twella has eyes only for the alien. Would it succumb to fear of the unknown? Anger at the beasts? War? Not peace, or it wouldn't have a gun. Eventually, the first war beast topped the rubble and spotted the human. The human made a sound, possibly some words. The beast roared in response, calling packmates for a swarming strike. As it rushed the human, a crack filled the air as his weapon fired. The first beast staggered, then fell with a second attack. The human turned the weapon on the rest, killing the creatures before they could get close enough. Unfortunately, the sounds of smells of blood only drew more beasts to the alien. More and more swarmed the street, recklessly charging. The human just kept firing. Twella gasped. For a brief second, she'd seen the ice-cold grasp of logic grip the creature. Her people had been preyed upon by logic once before the clairvoyance, but that momentary sway of the human was soon replaced by something worse. War. The sharp claws and fangs of war dug deeper into the human as it fought on. It was the drive to fight and never stop, different than anger's blazing flames. Twella held herself back from jumping down there to begin immediate exorcism. She had a job to observe these creatures, not intervene. When the last beast fell, war had taken the alien completely. She could see the fangs, claws, and bristled fur that clairvoyance saw in war-bound people. What a shame that it fell to war so easily. Some old spirits took time, but war could be fast in the right place. A shifting of rubble caught Twella's ears. It also caught the alien's attention. The piece of a building, opposite the beasts, partially collapsed. The alien approached the rubble, weapon raised, and shouted something. Twella's translator still had nothing to tell her. A piece of rubble moved, exposing what lay beneath. Even from this distance, there was no mistaking the body. A Zariki infant. The Zariki were a very reptilian species, with scales, fanged maws, claws, and strong tails. This one was very small, no larger than the human's torso. She was also female, given the frilly crests only the females had. From what she knew of their incubation and growth, Twella guessed this hatchling must have hatched after her people's extinction. And now, the last of a species stood before an alien, controlled by war. The hatchling shied away, screeching in fear. That's when Twella realized she must have been a clairvoyant, for she must be seeing war. Tuella bit her lip. Her duty was to observe, but if this human killed the Tshirt, it would mean the end of a species the Greater Whole regretted exterminating years ago. The human reholstered its weapon. Tuella froze. It was going to beat this hatchling to death or tear it apart by hand. She took a deep breath. Even clairvoyance could fall to old spirits. She had to remain calm. The alien stepped closer to the Tshirt, and Tuella raised her service weapon. One life for a whole race. Then war vanished. The claws and fangs unhooked themselves from the human painlessly. The aura and bristled fur faded out. It took naught but a few seconds, but the human was free of war. There was no struggle. War simply evaporated. Tuella had seen and performed many exorcisms, but this was different. It was by all means an impossibility. No clairvoyant, no matter their attunement to spirits, could cure themselves. Children, like that hatchling, had neither the knowledge nor age to perform such a flawless exorcism. Children can be affected until a certain age, and vice versa. The human reached for the hatchling, with a palm facing upward. The hatchling snapped to the hand, and the human narrowly avoided getting his hand nipped. As Tshirit's fangs and claws didn't grow sharp until a certain age, but the instinct to bite, claw, and fight was still there. Now Tuella expected war to return to the human and strike the hatchling down. Maybe these humans could hide the old spirit's effects, but war didn't appear. Instead, the human tried again twice. When those had the same result, the human reached into its bag. The hand emerged with a bar of some sort. The human took a bite, chewed and swallowed, and then tossed the bar to the Tshirt. Food was surprisingly compatible between alien species, and Tshirt could eat just about anything, even if they got nothing out of it. The girl sniffed it before grasping it in her hands and taking a bite. The human again reached for the girl. This time, she didn't fight, but still flinched. The human scooped the girl into its arms like a Saffronite's mother would her newborn. A war beast's cry shattered the tender moment. The human turned, grabbing its weapon, and clutching the child in one swift movement. War returned at last, fangs and claws burying themselves into the human. And anger joined this time too, lashing flames coating the human. The two were often hand in hand, as far as all spirits went, though they contested for Frow's. This time, both were more solid than ever, so potent that Tuella could feel their pull. She quickly recited the chant of serenity to hone her mind against the old spirits. The human unloaded a round into the beast, then a second, then a third, and finally a fourth. The human looked around, scanning for more. Then it turned to the hatchling in its arms. She was clutching his chest, crying in fear over the loud noises the weapon made. Then, war and anger were gone again, just like that. At this point, Tuella didn't know what to expect. The human had fallen to war against the beasts, but carried this child so tenderly. Then war returned with anger, but the human cast both aside effortlessly, if it was even aware of the old spirits. The old spirits were powerful things whose parasitic essence implanted their nature in life across the galaxy to feed. These humans, Tuella wondered what made them so special. She must investigate further. Still cloaked, she climbed down from her vantage point and followed the human. The alien was inspecting the hatchling, likely looking for injuries. It then looked around, inspecting the rubble she crawled from. There was nothing but dirty rags making a nest there, so the human let it be. It pulled the girl close to his chest, exposing its delicate neck to the Tshirt hatchling. Either it had no self-preservation, or it simply didn't care. The human turned and trekked out of the ruined city, Tuella close behind. The human was walking in a line to the ship it had arrived on. All the while, both the human and Tuella kept a hand near their weapons. While Tuella mentally repeated the chant of serenity to keep fear away, the human seemed completely focused on the environment and the hatchling. As they walked, Tuella couldn't stop the growing sensation in her chest. Something in her clairvoyant senses was screaming at her. Even as they got closer to the ship, the sensation got worse. The only problem was, she didn't know what. War and anger were back. The winds howled. The wildlife fled, and the clouds grew dark overhead to blot out the sun. And above all else, war and anger appeared in all their terrifying splendor. The old spirits were non-physical beings by nature, preying on the wayward souls of mortals who followed their nature. To appear outside of a host was among the worst of omens for a clairvoyant. Twella had only seen it once before in a general who'd been turned by lust. The old spirit had been so deeply entrenched in everyone's minds that safe removal was completely impossible. Sometimes an old spirit might appear whenever something so antithetical to their nature overcomes their slaves. A warmonger who turned over a new leaf, an aristocrat turned into a philanthropist and the like. But physical didn't mean they could directly affect mortals, just that the allure of their domains became overwhelmingly powerful. Perhaps that is why war and anger appeared now, because this human had rejected them so soundly. It mattered not, as they loomed over the human and the hatchling. War was a roaring feline with knives for claws and fangs, with a mane of ash. Anger took the form of a burning serpent, dripping fiery venom from its fangs. They gnashed their teeth, hissed and roared at the human, standing between it and the ship. Twella sank to her knees. Despite having nothing to fight, the desire was there, fueled by an anger at something she didn't know. Her gaze landed on the only living things around her. The human. It had brought the wrath of the old spirits down on the both of them. But the human barely spared the two old spirits a glance, before its eyes focused on the hatchling in its arms. It took one step towards the spirits, undeterred. Then a second. War roared at the human, speaking in the languages of war. The fear of the other, the desire to consume, to have conquest, to prove one's strength. But the human did not relent as it moved closer, even as the winds howled against it. Something in its movement slapped Twella out of her trance. The human was the focus of two old spirits, yet only had eyes for the hatchling. Step by step, the human moved past war and anger, clutching the girl close. And despite all the power the old spirits had, they could not stop the two. Eventually, something changed in the old spirits. War couldn't roar, and anger had no venom. The two shrank, fading from non-clairvoyant sight, until they were no bigger than the hatchling in the human's arms. This human had brought two old spirits to heel, where all of Twella's clairvoyance would have meant nothing. She numbly watched as the human and hatchling entered the ship, and left the planet a few minutes later. Twella wasn't sure how long she sat on that planet, stunned. She witnessed the impossible, a miracle, but she eventually managed to stumble her way back to her ship in a daze. The Greater Halls Council was, understandably, in disbelief at Twella's report on her encounter with the human. Despite both her footage and being clear of spiritual and biological afflictions, there was skepticism about her report. Whether this human was a clairvoyant, an outlier, or average for his species, it would shake the established rules on old spirits. But, after a long debate, initiating a peaceful first contact was given tier support. First contact had been bizarre. The Greater Halls Council secured communication with the human governing body and arranged an official first contact. Twella, as the only person with anything close to experience with these aliens, was on the diplomatic team. They had planned a meeting on a neutral planet that would support their biologists. The landing went smoothly, and the Greater Halls ambassadorial team reached the meeting place first. Twella was the first to spot the humans, and they were just as surprising as the first. They were enthralled by old spirits, just like the first. Many were tied to fear, while some to joy. Every clairvoyant under Twella bristled until she reminded them what they'd been told about the human's strange relationship with the old spirits. As far as first contact meetings went, humans made one of the stranger ones. That wasn't to say worse, of course. It was just that humans could emanate the presence of an old spirit one moment, then nothing the next. But they conducted themselves so professionally that Twella would have thought they were chilled by cold logic. When the topic eventually came to clairvoyance, was where things became strange. They had never heard of them, much less of the old spirits. The more they were questioned, the more confused they became. That topic was shelved for another day. Tuella was eventually posted as the bodyguard of the ambassador to these humans, until a more formal agreement could be brokered. As of now, she stood posted outside the ambassador's ship, in the hangar of a human space station. There were no non-humans aboard. The Greater Whole had been their first contact. Just a human male, a human female, another human female, a Zariqui. Tuella jolted. There, across the hangar, was a familiar pair of a human male and a Zariqui hatchling. The little girl wore a simple blue dress. "Hey, you, human! Zariqui!" Tuella called out. The human noticed Tuella and pushed himself between the hatchling and her. "Can I help you?" he asked warily. "I just wanted to talk," Tuella said quickly. "I recognize you from the planet where you found the Zariqui hatchling. You brought her with you." "Zariqui?" The human looked at the hatchling. "Oh, so that's what they're called. I tried to find her family, but no one seems to want to talk about them." "They're functionally extinct," Tuella whispered sadly. "They got in a war they never had a chance to win. Chances are her family's long gone." The Zariqui clutched the human's leg, tighter. The human crouched down to pat her head and comfort her. "That's terrible," he said. "Was that all you wanted to say?" "Well, no," Tuella replied. "But manners. I'm Tuella." "Adam." "Adam." Tuella tried the human name on her tongue. "I wanted to ask you about something I saw on that planet. When you were down there, forgive me for saying this, but I saw you with old spirits." "The what?" Adam asked. Eventually he snapped his finger, an odd gesture, and nodded. "Right, they told me your people believe in these ancient emotion ghost things?" "The old spirits," Tuella corrected. "They are cosmic parasites that create turbulent feelings in sapients, yet for some reason what I saw from you made no sense." "I don't follow." "When you were down there and those war beasts attacked, I saw you consumed by the old spirit of war, the primordial embodiment of conflict. She," Tuella pointed to the Zariqui, "could see it too. Understand, once old spirits have a hold of you, they don't let go. But when you were with her, all that war and anger went away. I must know. Can you think of any reason why?" "I've given it some thought," Adam admitted. "We got one of your doctors in to see her, but she asking me if I was feeling the spirits or something." "It's a common affliction." "But that's just it. Humans, we don't believe in any of that. To us, those emotions are just there, I guess. Not all of them feel good, but they're a part of us. Part of growing up is learning to control these emotions." "They're part of you?" Tuella asked. She'd never, in all her studies as a clairvoyant, heard of a species that thought of the old spirits as part of themselves. The only way for them to be part of you was to be ensorcelled by their power. "How do I describe it?" Adam asked himself. "We humans are complicated. You said you saw war." Tuella nodded. "Well, we humans have been fighting for generations. I was a soldier once, but if we trace it back far enough, humans have always been made for that. It's easy to hold grudges, get lost in the fight, obsess over our vices. But we like to think we can be more. We always try." "But why can you cast a war so easily?" "I guess it's because of her," Adam said, placing a hand on the Zariqui hatchling. "Humans, we're social. I can't speak for us all, but for us soldiers, it's never about the fighting. It's about what we're fighting for. Long before we reached space, we fought each other a lot. Despite that, we're strongest when we have something worth fighting for. On that planet, I just wanted to protect her." Humans don't want to go to war because we want to fight. We go to war because we want to go home. Everything we do is for the people we care about. We don't go to war because we really want to. Surviving it can hurt, it can break us, but we try our best for them. Does that make any sense? Tuella nodded slightly. Adam smiled. "Great. Well, I like to talk, but it's nearly Tia's bedtime. Good night, Tuella." Tuella waved numbly as the two left. Later that night, Twella did as much research as she could into human wars, then into familial bonds and biology. The station had graciously allowed her access to human history. In the early hours of the morning, Twella wrote a note to the Clairvoyant Covenant. On humans and war. I've been spending a lot of time around humans recently. I've noticed that they very closely tie to old spirits, but, for reasons we haven't identified, have their personality untouched. Most of all, their ability to resist war. I have a suggestion. Humans put war in a box. For them, war isn't a spirit, but a state of being. They have little desire to use it, but will use it willingly, nevertheless. They embrace it fully, in all its aspects, and when their enemies give up or can't fight, war goes back in the box. I do know not the mechanism for it, because, for all, some of them talk of their belief in the immaterial. I have found no clairvoyance among them. It is not because they are slaves to peace without free will, or because their biology can only fight for a short time. I have considered the opposite, that their role as endurance hunters means that they could use war for a long time, but it cannot explain how they stop. The old spirit doesn't control them from the outside. It's within each of them. War can't control them any more than a limb can control the rest of the body. Influence, true, but not control completely. They let war out, not because they have an all-encompassing desire to destroy what's in front of them, but to protect what's behind them. I have nothing but awe for such a novel concept. Every time we've gone to war, we can't stop ourselves. These humans still fear war, but not for the same reasons as us. Their fear is equal to their respect. War is locked away because that's where it belongs. For them, it is a terrible tool, but only that. They put war in a box.